Good morning.
Morning.
The scripture reading this morning will be from Philippians 4, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Therefore, my brothers, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm thus in the Lord, my beloved. I entreat Euodia and I entreat Syntyche to agree in the Lord."
Good morning. Please get your Bibles and turn to Philippians chapter number 4. And we're going to study verses 1 through 5 today for our lesson. Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. So have your Bibles out to learn something. Hope you got a notebook. Hope you got a paper that you can write a few R words down. We're going to have some R words today, the alliteration. So write these words down, and there may be a jogging to help us to do better in our life. When it comes to conflict resolution, in this world, we have conflict all around us, everywhere we turn. Have you been keeping up with the news? Do we have a Speaker of the House of Representatives yet? No. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is vacant. That office is vacant. For the first time in American history, we had a Speaker of the House, the United States House of Representatives, to be thrown out. And there was conflict. Has been conflict since the very beginning of him being put in. There's conflict all the time when it comes to politics. We see that everywhere. Conflict here, conflict there. Turn on the news. You seeing conflict between one party, the other party, one member, the other member of the House or of the Senate. Conflict, conflict, and more conflict. Now we're seeing things happen that has never happened in the history of our country. Never happened, from impeachments to impeachment requirements to kicking out House of Speaker of House, to all sorts of things are happening. Conflict, conflict, conflict. And it's not only happening in politics. We see it happen in our family. There's conflict in our family between husband and wife, between mother and father and children, between brothers and sisters, between cousins and uncles and aunts. There's just conflict in the family. There's conflict in our jobs. We go to work and we hope, let's go to work and make a living for our family. But even in our work, there's conflict between the boss and between the fellow co-workers, between the customers, and it's conflict everywhere. We see it even in the church. It happens even in the church, where there's conflict between one party, the other party, one person, the other person, just conflict between the leadership and the folks who are not in the leadership. There's this conflict everywhere. Not necessarily in Liberty. I think Liberty has learned quite a bit about conflict resolution. But we got to talk about it because it's out there. It's everywhere. And we want to learn more about it. It's been happening since the beginning of time. Go all the way back to the beginning. Cain killed Abel. Conflict. Going up to Noah, when God, he found grace in the eyes of God. And yet, when he got off that ark, he made that vineyard, he got drunk, and there was conflict with his child Ham. Conflict there. There's conflict with Abraham and Sarah, with Ishmael and Hagar. Conflict between Ishmael and Isaac. Conflict, conflict, conflict. And then when Isaac had a child, Jacob and Esau, the twins, conflict between Jacob and Esau. And you go on down through history, Moses had conflict. He was a leader. A leader. God chose him specifically to lead the people out, and yet there was conflict in his family between Aaron and Miriam and all sorts of problems there. Conflict between Saul and David. David trying to do the right thing, Saul jealous, but there's conflict. And then you just go through the history of the kings. Just read the kings, read the prophets, and you'll see conflict, conflict, conflict. When you come over into the New Testament, Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. One of the greatest sermon that's ever been preached in the history of mankind, and it deals with all sorts of issues that mankind deals with, and he had to deal with conflict. And you see that in Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, which we'll look at in a little bit. But there is conflict there, and he had to deal with it. And by the way, if you want to listen, we preach the sermons through the Sermon on the Mount on a Sunday night. So if you want to hear the lesson that Jesus dealt with conflict, it's on February the 26th on Sunday night. So if you want to get that, get a CD of it and listen to it. It might be helpful. But that covers verses 21 through 26 of chapter 5 when Jesus specifically dealt with conflict. Jesus felt like it was important to deal with it because it's so real. Paul dealt with conflict. We've been studying on our class on Wednesday night in the auditorium through 1 Corinthians. And every single chapter, he's dealing with some conflict that they were having there in the church. Paul had to deal with it through all the different facets of his ministry. If you go into Romans, here's what he said to the Romans, chapter number 12, verse number 18. And I'm reading this from the English Standard Version. And here's what Paul said to the Romans. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Conflict is out there, Paul said. It's out there. Everybody deals with it. And he says, if possible. Now, he realized that there's limitations to conflict resolution. You can't, some people are just in a place that they just will not be reasoned with. They will not want resolution, being resolved, the issue. And so sometimes it's not possible, but if possible. And then he made this clarification, or we put this kind of in a apostrophe or comma. He says, listen, as far as it depends on you. Now you think about that. When there's conflict, you can't control the other person. You cannot control the other party. I don't care what you say, what you do, what you threaten, what you bribe. You cannot control them oftentimes because they're another party, another person. But as far as it depends on you, you have 100% control over your part. 100% control over what I do. If I'm having a conflict with my wife, if I'm having a conflict with my children, sometimes I can't control my boy. I can't control my girl. I just cannot. I try to do the best I can. My wife, I certainly can't control her. But as far as it depends on me, I do have control over how I respond, how I talk, how I act. And if I get angry, if I don't get angry, if I do this, I don't do this. It's all up to me. As far as it depends on me, then live peaceably in this relationship. Paul dealt with conflict. And in Philippians, chapter number 4, verses 1 through 5, as Peyton just read just a moment ago, he talked about two women. I can't pronounce it either. I gave him that reading to read, and there's those two words. And he said, why did you do that to me? I'm going to pronounce it Euodias and Syntyche. Would that be okay? Don, help me. Syntyche. We're going to call it E and S. E and S. These are two women, and they were in Philippi. And Paul is addressing the Philippian church, and he made a comment about those two women. And he said to those two women that they need to work together. They need to be of the same mind. We'll see that in the Lord. Now, some people say, well, you know what? That means that E and S were having some conflict. And Paul had to tell them to deal with that conflict, to resolve that conflict, some conflict resolution. Other people say, no, just because he told those two women to be of the same mind in the Lord doesn't mean they were having a conflict. It could mean that he was just encouraging them to be of the same mind, even though they were probably at peace with one another. And that's a possibility. But regardless, whether they were having a conflict or not having a conflict, there are some principles found in verses 1 through 5 that will certainly help us when it comes to a conflict resolution. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Verses 1 through 5, let's remind everyone what those texts says. Therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. And I beseech E, and I beseech S, that they be of the same mind in the Lord. And I entreat thee, also true yoke fellow, help those women which labor with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say, rejoice. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. So what can we learn from those 5 verses? I submit that the first thing that we can learn from those 5 verses is to get my clicker clicking. So I'm going to turn it off because my zeros are blinking, Don, so I don't know what that means. The first R word, write it down, is regard. Regard. Look at verse number 1 at the very beginning. He said, beloved. Regard someone means to have regard for them, to love them, to care about them, to be concerned about them. Regard them. He says, you're beloved. You're longed for. Paul is writing to the Philippian church. He's in jail, and the Philippians have sent him some help. And he appreciates them so much, but he loves those folks. He calls them beloved, and he says, I long for you. I miss you. That's the idea. He goes on to say, and I consider you my joy and my crown. That's having a regard for someone. You are my joy. You bring me happiness. You bring me joy, I should say. And you're my crown. The work that I put into the ministry, you are involved in that. And I consider you my crown. He said, I have a high regard for you. Folks, that's the first step to resolve any kind of conflict, is to have a regard for the other party. If the Democrats and the Republicans or the Independents or the whatever other parties there are out there, if they don't have some sort of regard for one another, then there will never be any kind of conflict resolution. What one says, the other one's against. It doesn't matter. If this one starts saying the same thing that this one was saying, then that one's against it now. You know, that sort of thing. Why? Because there's no regard. I don't have a concern. I don't consider you beloved. If I don't love my wife, then there is no basis, there's no foundation for any kind of conflict resolution. It just cannot happen. Why? I don't regard her. I don't have respect for her. I don't have a concern. Now, hey, by the way, I do. This is just an illustration, young people. You know, I do have regard for her, and I do have respect for her, and I do love her. But if I didn't, then there would be no basis for any kind of conflict resolution. Whenever anything comes into our sphere, then there will be a fight about it. Whether she burnt the toast or whether I didn't do something I was supposed to do, take out the garbage or something, then all of a sudden it's a fight. It's a fight about nothing, really. Why? It's not about the garbage. It's not about the toast. It's about the fact that I don't have regard for her. She don't respect me. I don't respect her. She don't love me. I don't love her. And same thing with the kids. You know, I just don't have respect for them. They don't have respect for me. They don't have any regard for my opinion, any regard for my wisdom that I think I have or I don't have. And so there cannot be any basis, any foundation. The first thing we got to have is regard. That's not just in family or at church. That's at your job. That's in the country. That's everywhere. Anytime there is any need for a conflict to be resolved, the first thing we got to make sure we have is we got a regard for one another. Now here's the point. I can't make you have regard for me. I just can't. It's impossible. Now I can do some things, as we'll see as we go through, but I certainly can't force you to have any kind of regard for me at all, any kind of love for me at all. I can't do it. But as Paul told the Romans, as much as in me is. Now I can choose to whether I'm going to have any regard for you. Now, if I make that decision to have some sort of love for you, have some sort of regard for you, have some sort of concern about you, then, at least as much as in me is, we are at a point that we can have some sort of conflict resolution. But it's still, there's the other party involved. But there's got to be regard from both parties before this can even have a foundation to start any kind of resolution. But then the second thing is to do the right thing. Look at verse number 1 continuity. He says, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. Stand fast in the Lord. When you say stand fast, that means stand your ground. First of all, it certainly can mean don't quit. The first thing that people want to do when there is a conflict is to run away from it, to quit. I'll just quit. Well, wait a minute, we have a little issue here. I know, I quit. Why? Well, first of all, I don't have any regard for you anyway. Don't have any regard for you, so it's very easy for me to leave. So if I don't have any regard for my wife, I don't have any regard for my boss, and I don't love him at all, when he makes me mad, when there's some sort of conflict, well, I'll just quit. I'll just walk away. If I go to church somewhere and the elders make a decision I don't like, I'll just quit. Well, folks, stand fast and do the right thing. Now, the right thing is the right thing. Now, you think you're right, they think they're right, and there's a conflict about that. How do you deal with what the right thing? Of course, we know that the word of the Lord is the truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. I am the life, the truth, the way. You know, that's me. So let's just look to the Lord on this issue. Let's look to the Lord on what he has to say and do the right thing. Now, sometimes, folks, I'm going to say this carefully, but listen carefully. Sometimes it is the right thing not to do the right thing. What? You should always do the right thing. Wait a minute. You remember what Paul said? What if you eat meat that has been offered to an idol? Nothing wrong with that. It would be the right thing to eat pork. Paul is basically telling these folks, you can have a ham sandwich if you want one. It's the right thing. It's no problem. But if it caused your brother to offend, Paul said, I will eat no meat, even though it's the right thing. I will eat no meat as long as the world stands, if it caused my brother. Why? Because I've got regard for my brother. I'm concerned about his thing. I'm concerned about offending him. So, when we're in this conflict, even though you're right, even though there's nothing wrong with doing what you're doing, it'd be the right thing to do if you did it, then don't do it if it causes a problem, if you regard that other person. Sometimes it's the right thing not to do the right thing. Now, if it's the right thing, in the sense that it's doctrinal and it's what the Lord says and it has to do with your salvation, don't you back up one little bit. Because the first thing that you can know that that person that's on the other side of that conflict is wrong. They are preaching a false doctrine. If they tell you to worship Satan and worship the demons, you stand fast. You don't back up from that. And it's the right thing to say the right thing. What? That's wrong. What you're preaching, what you're teaching is wrong. And you stand fast in that. Don't quit. Don't run away from it. And you will probably get hurt. There will be some problems in this conflict. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse number 12, he says, yea, this is Paul talking to Timothy, who experienced all kinds of conflict. Read all about that. But he says, yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. If you're trying to do the right thing, in fact, you know what the right thing is, you're doing the best you can, you're weak, you don't make all the perfect decisions, you make some mistakes and you fall short, but you're trying to do the right thing. Well, guess what? The person on the other side of the conflict is going to persecute you. They're going to talk bad about you. They're going to hurt you in some way if they can. But listen, as much as in you is, that's what Paul said to the Romans, remember, as much as it depends on you, do the right thing. And then try to reconcile. Try to get this thing worked out. Look at verse number 2 of our text. This is what he said to E and S, those two women. Be of the same mind. Get together on this. Reconcile this. Have the same mind. Have the same understanding. Have the same judgment. Try to get the right thing and get it together. You believe this. I believe that. Let's reconcile that and come to what's right. Now, there's a big difference between unity, which is what he's saying to have. Come together of the same mind. Unity. Get together. And union. There's one thing to have union, that's just sticking it together, and to have unity. One fellow put it this way. You can take two cats, and you can tie their tails together, and you can throw them over a clothesline. Folks, you got union, but how much unity do you have? You don't have unity. They're going to fight, they're going to claw, they're going to bite. They're union, they're stuck together, but they're not of the same mind. They're not working to the same purpose. So when we have a conflict with our spouse, with a boss, with a church, with a community, whatever it be, with politics, understand this, that just being together is not going to solve the conflict. It's not going to resolve it. We still got to come to some sort of reconciliation. And that's what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. When he told them in Matthew chapter number 5, if you're going to worship God and you're going to bring a gift to the altar, and you remember that you have something against your brother, has something against you, you have something against your brother, there is some sort of a conflict, he said, leave your gift at the altar. That's what he told them to do. Leave your gift there at the altar and go your way. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Try to make that thing right. Because you want to do the right thing, and you do have regard for the other person. If you don't have regard for the other party, you're not going to get this far. And if you really don't want to do the right thing, even though it means not doing the right thing, then you're not going to get this far. But if you want to do the right thing, and you want to stand fast, and you ain't going to quit, you're going to stick it out, and you don't want to just have union, you want to have some unity, then work that thing out. Try to get together and make that happen, because it's good for us. Listen to Romans chapter 14, verse 19. Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace. There's some things out there that make for peace. That means when we do them, when we act upon them, when we respond positively to them, peace will prevail. And when we need to find out what those things are, though. That's a whole study in itself. But what are the things that make for peace? So study about that. What can I do that will bring peace, that will make for peace? But he says, follow after the things which make for peace, and the things whereof or wherewith one may edify another. If I want to resolve the conflict and come to a reconciliation of unity, then I need to be thinking about what will build the other up, what will edify the other, what will help the other in terms of encouragement, in terms of whatever it takes that makes for peace. And it goes a step further then. If we can get that far, where I want to encourage my wife, I want to encourage my son, I want to encourage my daughter, I want to encourage a boss, I want to encourage a fellow member at church, and encourage the elders, whatever it is, and I want to have the unity of the right thing because I love them, I regard them, now I'm ready to move on. And what is it? Be a rock for somebody. And I use the word rock because it is a term that is a sound place that you can rest upon. Look at verse number 3. Help those women. Sometimes we need some outside help. Sometimes somebody needs to come in that we trust. He says, listen, yoke fellow, a yoke fellow. 2 oxen's got a yoke on their neck, and they're having to work together. They are yoke fellows. And so they got to dig that ditch, plow that field. So one can't go that way and one can't go that way. They're yoke fellows. And so Paul is saying, I got a yoke fellow there at Philippi. He is one that promotes unity. He's one that really helps people find unity. He says, I want you to do something, Mr. Yoke fellow. What? Help those women. Be a rock for those women. And that's why I use the R word, rock. Basically, somebody can come in and encourage, can come in and help, because they have the same purpose, the same plan, the same regard for those folks. They're outside of the conflict, but maybe they can step in and help. Maybe you're ready for that point. But not just for somebody from the outside to help, but what if I have a conflict with another party and I'm trying to reconcile, I'm trying to encourage them? Well, maybe one way to do that is to help them. What do you need? What's going on in your life? If I got regard for you, want to do the right thing, and I want to resolve our conflict, then maybe I can do something to actually help you through the circumstance or through the situation or whatever it takes. Because Solomon said in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse number 9, 2 are better than 1. If you have a yoke fellow, somebody that maybe they're stronger and they can carry that yoke a little bit better. They can pull it. They know how. And then you yoke up with them. And now they are your yoke fellow. And you can get under their care. You can get under their burden. They can carry that burden for you. And they can teach you and love on you and get you through these circumstances. Maybe that's what we need, a yoke fellow to be our rock. Why? Because 2 are better than 1. Because they have good reward for their labor. Verse number 10 in Ecclesiastes 4 says, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. So if you got a yoke and you got 2 oxen and one falls, well, you got this big strong ox that can lift him up, that can hold that yoke and say, hey, I got you. Not going to let you go to the ground. But Ecclesiastes, Solomon said, but woe to him that is alone when he falls. When he falls and he's by himself and he doesn't have a yoke fellow, then he's down on the ground on his knees in the mire, and he's in a mess. Woe unto that fellow, for he hath not another to help him up. Folks, we can get in trouble if we don't have a rock. That's why we don't need to quit. We don't need to run off. We need to do the right thing. We need to stand fast. We need some yoke fellows. But unfortunately, people quit. They run off. They don't want to do the right thing. They don't have any regard for anybody else, and they don't want to reconcile their differences. So when they fall hard, and then they expect somebody to come in and pick them up. Well, they're not even yoked. They're not even yoked. Jesus said, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Come to me and let me be your yoke fellow. I can lift you up. But if you're out there and you fall, there's nobody to lift you up. And then you can't expect nobody to run and lift you up. They don't know your problems. They don't know what you have in problem. Well, you just don't have any regard for me. Yes, they may have very much regard for you, but you quit. You run off, and there's nobody there. And it's so sad. We need to be a rock for each other. Certainly Jesus needs and wants to be our rock. And then, if we have this, we work it out, and we finally we're each other's yoke fellow. I can't be yours because I don't have the ability to be yours, but somebody else can be, and certainly Jesus can be ultimately. But if we got each other, we got each other's back, and all of that, then we can rejoice. Then we got something to be happy about. Verse number 4, rejoice in the Lord always. And then again, he said, I say rejoice. We got plenty to be happy about. Now remember that happiness and rejoice are 2 different things. I want to clarify that. If I'm not happy, that doesn't mean that I can't rejoice. Joy and happiness are 2 different things. Paul, when he was whipped, thrown in jail, and he is in the Philippian, when he's writing to the Philippians, he was in jail. When he was in jail in Philippi, and he and Silas was whipped, folks, they were rejoicing. They sang at midnight, and the Philippian jailer was baptized as a result of their preaching. They were rejoicing. They had joy in their heart. But I promise you, they were not happy. I don't see them being happy. Can you imagine? Oh, I'm so happy that I got beat today. I'm so happy that I'm in just jail today. I see a difference in those 2 words. When I'm happy, I feel good, I feel lifted up, I feel excited, and all that. But I can have joy even in a time of deep unhappiness. And that's what we need to search. Most people are searching for happiness. That's what our Constitution is. The life, liberty, and the pursuit of what, class? Happiness. Well, folks, pursuing happiness, that's not the ultimate. Oh, I'm happy when I got plenty of money to pay the bills. Oh, I'm happy when my health is good. I'm happy when I don't have very many conflicts in my life. Boy, that just makes me happy. But some people have all of these things and have no joy. That's why they're doing drugs. That's why they're going looking for alcohol. That's why they're going to get in trouble somehow, because they're looking for some sort of basic joy in their life. We can have joy even in times when we're not very happy. But we can rejoice in the Lord. And that's where our joy is rooted from. That's why we've got to regard each other. We cannot quit. We've got to stand fast. We've got to do the right thing. We've got to reconcile our differences and be a yoke fellow. That will lead us to rejoicing. And that's why Paul said to the Corinthians that we've been studying on Wednesday night here in our class in the auditorium. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 26 says this: whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. So that's a good thing. We can have rejoicing. And finally, we got some good reasons to do it. Now, there's many reasons that we can look at. But in this text, we see two reasons. Two reasons that we need to resolve our conflicts. And here's the first one. Let your moderation be known unto all men. Reason number one, people are watching us. They are looking at us. And this moderation, another translation translates it to gentleness. We're not fighting each other. We're not in conflict with each other. And that's a good thing. In this congregation at Liberty, I see peace. I've been in congregation. I've seen it throughout my life when there was such conflict that it was miserable. People backbiting, gossiping, stabbing each other in the back. It's so sad to see that. In a business meeting, saw grown Christian men pointing their fingers at each other. I quit. I don't care if you do. That sort of thing. Of course, fortunately, I've seen them come back and cry on each other's shoulder and repent, and that's a good thing. They resolved their conflict and they rejoiced in the Lord. But unfortunately, when we don't see gentleness in the congregation, then all men are out there seeing that. Paul says, let your moderation, your gentleness, be known to all men. Let the community say, boy, I love that congregation over there. I don't go there, but I appreciate those people because they're so gentle. They're so kind. They get along with each other. You can't get them to talk bad about each other out there in the community. They just won't do it. You start asking them, what about so-and-so? What about so-and-so? I know where you go. You go where that person right there goes. Yeah, I do. Well, don't you know about them? This, that, and the other? Oh, boy. They'll turn on the gates and they'll start talking about it. And all men will see that they're not so gentle up there. Folks, let all your people see that there is moderation. There is gentleness. That's a reward for resolving these conflicts. And then another reward is, look at verse number 5. The Lord is at hand. Jesus is coming soon. And it won't be long. Luke chapter number 12, verse 36 says this. Ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he comes, shall find watching. God is watching. We should be watching for the Lord's return. And if we're in the middle of conflict and we're not watching, wouldn't it be a shame for the Lord to come while we're not in gentleness and moderation? There's a reward for having a conflict resolution. Our greatest problem, and of course, we're not perfect. In the boss, he's not perfect, I'm not perfect. I'm going to have problems with him from time to time. Out there in the community, we're going to do some things, going to happen. They're going to see me not being so gentle. And there's going to be all kinds of stuff in my family. I could just tell you stories, not going to. But those are the things that are happening and things that have happened. Things have happened in other congregations that you might have been a member of and you've seen it. Things happen. And we can sit all day long and say, you. It's your fault, your fault, your fault, your fault. And the reason I quit is because of you. In fact, Paul says, as much as in you is. It's not about you. It's about me. What am I doing? And no, I'm not doing everything that I should do. I'm not. I need to do better. We're studying on Sunday night. We just started a brand new study on prayer. And I'm learning some things about prayer. And I'm trying to practice some things about prayer. Hope y'all all come back on tonight, 6 o'clock. And we're going to have a series on prayer. And I want to do better. And I want to get better. And I don't always do the best thing. And I don't always regard people like I should. And I don't always do the right thing in the right circumstances at the right time. And maybe I don't reconcile. And maybe I'm not a good yoke fellow. I'm not a good rock to stand on. And maybe I'm not happy when you're happy or sad when you're sad. Maybe I'm not. And maybe I need to wake up and realize there's 2 good reasons for me to do better. People are watching me, and Jesus is coming soon. We better get right in the sight of God, because the greatest conflict that we can possibly have is sin in our life and conflict with God. You can have conflict with me till the cows come home and until Jesus comes back. But let me tell you something. Your conflict with me will be spit in a gallon bucket compared to your conflict with God. Get your life right with God. Get your heart right with God. Don't worry about the conflict with me or the conflict with him or the conflict with her and all this stuff. We've talked about conflict resolution. There's ways to get that better and hope we can get better. But the conflict that we have among ourselves is nothing compared to the conflict that you're going to have with God if we hear him say, "Depart from me. I never knew you." We have a conflict. Let's resolve that. How? By coming to him, repenting of sin, repenting and confessing, being baptized for the mission to live faithfully. You've been baptized into Christ, come back and say, you know what? I do have a conflict with God. My sin and my iniquities have separated me from God. And I want to get that resolved. Are you resolved to have your conflict with God resolved? If so, why don't you come? Why together we stand and sing.